The wind carried a dry rattle across the plains that morning, the kind that came before something bad. The sun hung low, casting long shadows of the dying mesquite trees, and the world felt caught between peace and punishment. A lonely road stretched across the open land, its dust carrying stories no one wanted to remember. The air was still, but heavy and far off. The faint cry of a hawk echoed above the canyons like a warning. That was when the woman appeared. Her dress was torn from travel, the hem caked with dirt, her boots worn through at the soles. She was heavy with child, each step a quiet plea for mercy from a land that offered none. She clutched her belly with one hand and the side of her shawl with the other, looking back over her shoulder as if chased by her own shadow. Somewhere behind her, a horse's hooves struck the ground in slow, steady rhythm. The sound grew louder, deliberate, until it came to a stop. The woman froze. She turned, her breath sharp, and saw him. The Apache rider sat tall in his saddle, his dark hair tied back, his face unreadable under the brim of a sun-beaten hat. He wasn't one of the soldiers she'd escaped. His clothes were worn, patched with care, and a single silver feather hung from the side of his rifle strap. He watched her with eyes that had seen too much. The silence between them was strange, deep, almost respectful. She took a step back, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Please, don't do this," she said, her words barely louder than the wind. The Apache said nothing at first. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the dry soil. When he walked toward her, the woman's heart raced. She didn't run, though. Maybe she was too tired, or maybe she'd already run far enough to know that fear couldn't save her. The Apache stopped a few feet away, lowering his rifle. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice quiet, edged with something between anger and sorrow. His accent carried the weight of old tongues, shaped by mountains and loss. She swallowed hard, her hand tightening around her shawl. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "They took everything. I just want to reach the river." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze flicking to her swollen belly. Then he glanced past her, scanning the horizon. A thin trail of dust was rising in the distance. Riders. "You were followed," he said. The woman turned, her face draining of color. She knew that dust cloud too well. The same men who'd burned her home were coming, same ones who'd laughed as her husband fell in front of her. The Apache stepped closer, his jaw tightening. "They're less than a mile out," he muttered. "You'll never make it on foot." She stared at him, desperate. "Then help me," she said. "Please, I'm begging you." His eyes softened, but only for a second. "You're not my fight," he said. Yet the way he said it sounded like a lie, like he was trying to convince himself more than her. He turned his horse, ready to leave, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she stood there, trembling but unbroken, or maybe it was the memory of another woman long gone. He took a breath and faced her again. "Who are you running from?" "Soldiers," she said. "From Fort Yuma." At that name his expression changed. The calm broke. "Fort Yuma," he repeated under his breath, as if the words themselves carried poison. "They took my brother," he said quietly, almost to himself. "He never came back." She hesitated, sensing his pain. "Then you know what they're capable of," she said. "You know what they'll do if they find me?" For a moment, neither spoke. The sun climbed higher, painting the land in gold and heat. The Apache looked at the woman again, and his voice dropped. "Why are they chasing you?" She met his eyes, and for a second, it seemed like she might not answer. Then her voice broke. "Because of him," she said, resting her hand on her belly. "They said he isn't my husband's." The Apache's brow furrowed, confusion flickering in his dark eyes. "Then whose is it?" he asked, his tone almost unwilling to believe. Before she could answer, the sound of distant gunfire cracked through the wind. The woman flinched, instinctively covering her belly. The Apache turned toward the sound, his instincts snapping into place. "Get down," he said, pulling her toward a cluster of rocks. He crouched beside her, scanning the horizon. 3 riders, now blue coats glinting in the light. "They'll find us," she whispered. He looked at her steady. "Not if I stop them first." He rose, gripping his rifle, and the woman reached out, her fingers catching his sleeve. "Don't," she pleaded. "They'll kill you." He met her eyes, and in that instant, something passed between them, a shared understanding of loss, of the kind of pain only the old lands remembered. He gave her a small, almost broken smile. "I've already died once," he said. The shots came closer. The Apache moved with quiet precision, his body blending with the land like it was part of him. The woman stayed hidden, clutching her shawl, whispering a prayer she wasn't sure anyone would hear. Then came 3 sharp cracks of gunfire. The wind carried the echo down the ridge, and everything fell silent again. The woman lifted her head, trembling. The Apache returned, his shoulder bleeding, but alive. "They won't bother you anymore," he said, his voice rough. She stared at him, her heart breaking at the sight. "Why did you help me?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His breathing was heavy, his hand pressed to his wound. "Because once," he said slowly, "someone helped me when I didn't deserve it." She tore a piece of cloth from her dress and pressed it to his shoulder. "You need to rest," she said, but he shook his head. "We need to move. The fort will send more." They traveled together through the canyon's shadows, the sun bleeding red behind them. The land grew harsher, crueler, but neither stopped. Along the way he taught her where to find water, how to listen to the earth. Though he said little, she began to see something in him. Not the savage the soldiers described, a man running from his own ghosts. That night, they camped near a dry riverbed. The stars stretched endless above them, cold and watchful. The woman sat by the fire, her hand resting on her stomach, her eyes full of quiet sorrow. The Apache sat across from her, sharpening his knife, but his thoughts were far away. Finally, she spoke. "You never told me your name." He looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Names are for those who have homes," he said softly. "I have none." She smiled faintly, though her voice trembled. "Then maybe it's time you find one." The fire cracked between them. For a moment, the world felt almost calm. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a sound rose, the faint beat of drums. The Apache's head snapped up, his expression turning grave. "They're coming," he said. The woman's hand flew to her chest. "Who?" He stood, scanning the darkness. "Not soldiers," he said. "My own people." Her heart stilled. "Will they help us?" He hesitated, and for the first time fear crossed his face. "They won't understand," he said. "They'll see only what they've been taught to hate." The fire hissed, throwing shadows against the canyon walls. The woman rose slowly, her eyes wide, voice shaking. "And what do we do?" He looked at her for a long moment before stepping closer. He knelt down in front of her, his face solemn, and the flames flickered across his eyes. "Before they arrive," he said quietly, "you need to know something." Her breath caught. "What is it?" He paused, searching for the right words, and then finally, he said the unexpected, the kind of truth that could change everything. And in that still trembling moment before dawn, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The Apache's voice was low when he finally spoke, the firelight flickering against his face. "The child you carry," he said, pausing for breath, "it belongs to one of my own." The woman froze. The words didn't make sense at first, not in the way he said them. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She searched his face for a sign that he was joking or lying, but all she saw was pain. "Do you mean?" she whispered. He looked toward the darkness where the drums echoed, his jaw tight. "There was a raid," he said. "Months ago, near the borderlands. The soldiers blamed us for it, but it wasn't our doing. Some of our men were captured. Among them was my brother. He never returned. The fort claimed he died in chains, but I knew better. I went looking for him. I found only ashes, burned camps, and the bodies of women and men who had no fight left in them." His hand trembled slightly as he spoke, but his eyes stayed hard. "I thought he was gone, till I saw you." The woman stared at him, the fire crackling between them. "You think my child is your brother's?" she asked, her voice breaking. He nodded slowly. "I don't think. I know." Her chest rose and fell as she tried to breathe. The world felt too still. "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head. "I was married, my husband and I." She stopped, her voice caught in her throat. The Apache didn't move. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held a strange softness, like he understood the storm running through her. He took a step closer. "I saw your husband," he said quietly. At the fort. He was with the soldiers when they came through the valley. He was the one leading the hunt. She looked up sharply, her voice trembling. You're lying. His silence was the only answer she needed. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she sank to her knees, clutching her shawl to her chest. No, she whispered, shaking her head. He wouldn't. He couldn't. The Apache crouched in front of her, his tone low but firm. He turned on us, on you. Maybe he thought it would save him, but men like that don't stop until everything they touch burns. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. The fire popped between them, sending a shower of sparks into the night. Then why save me? She asked. If what you say is true, you should hate me too. He looked away toward the canyon shadows. Because hatred is what destroyed us, he said. Because my brother's spirit wouldn't want his child left to die. For a long while, neither spoke. The sound of drums faded into the wind, replaced by the low howl of coyotes in the distance. The woman's thoughts ran wild faces, memories. Pieces of her life she thought she understood now, twisting into something crueler. She thought of her husband's eyes, how cold they'd become before the soldiers came. She thought of the night the fire took her home, and how she had sworn she'd seen someone she knew riding away from the flames. The Apache stood and walked toward the darkness. They'll be here soon, he said. Should move. She rose slowly, her body heavy, but her spirit heavier. If they're your people, she said, maybe we can reason with them. He shook his head. They won't see a woman. They'll see the enemy. You were married to the man who led the raids on our camps. To them, that makes you part of the war. The woman's heart sank. Then what do we do? He looked at her for a long moment before answering. We find the truth, he said. If what I believe is right, if my brother lived long enough to leave you with child, there'll be proof somewhere. Maybe in the fort, maybe with the traders who passed through the river towns. Someone knows what happened that night. She looked at him, her eyes full of questions she didn't know how to ask. And what if you're wrong? She whispered. He didn't answer. The wind blew across the canyon, scattering the ashes of their small fire. Then we'll both have to live with what comes, he said finally. They set out before dawn, the desert painted silver by the pale light. The land stretched endlessly before them, ridges, cliffs, dry rivers twisting through the earth like veins. The woman rode his horse while he walked beside her, limping slightly from the wound on his shoulder. He said little, and she didn't push him to speak. But every so often, he'd glance at her belly, and his face would soften with something like guilt. By midday, they reached a narrow trail leading through a valley of stone towers shaped by wind and time. The air shimmered with heat, and the smell of sage filled the air. The woman leaned forward in the saddle. What do they call this place? She asked. He looked up at the cliffs. Ghost's Hollow, he said. It's where my people used to bring their dead. We believe the wind carries their voices to the mountains. The woman shivered. It feels like they're still here, she said quietly. They are, he replied. As they moved through the valley, she noticed carvings on the rock walls, faded symbols and painted handprints. Some were bright red, others black, like shadows frozen in time. Did your brother ever come here? She asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Once the night before the raid that took him, he said the spirit spoke to him, told him to protect something greater than himself. I thought it was just a story then. They stopped near a cluster of rocks shaped like a broken crown. He reached into a pouch tied to his belt and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in animal hide. Inside was a fragment of metal, worn and bent, a piece of a soldier's badge. He held it up to the light. I found this near the river where the raid ended, he said. Your husband's unit wore these. Her stomach turned. Then you knew all along, she said. You knew who I was. He nodded slowly. I did. She looked at him, stunned. Still you helped me. He met her gaze, his expression steady. Because I needed to know why, he said. Why a woman married to a man like that would be running from the very soldiers who followed him. Her eyes filled with tears. Because he lied, she said. He told me we were settling new land. He said the Apache attacked first. But then I saw what he did, the fires, the villages, the children left behind. I tried to stop him. That's when he turned on me. The Apache's hand tightened around the badge. So the child you carry, he said quietly, you don't know for certain? She looked away. No, she said. And that's what haunts me. The air grew heavy with unspoken truth. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled soft, deep, like a warning. The Apache turned his head toward the horizon. Storm's coming, he said. We should find shelter. They found an old cave carved into the canyon wall and built a small fire inside. The woman sat near the entrance, watching the rain begin to fall. The Apache sat across from her, his face half hidden in shadow. For a long while, the only sound was the wind and the crackle of fire. Finally, she spoke. What will your people do if they find us? He didn't look at her. They'll judge me for helping you, he said. They'll say I betrayed the blood that runs in my veins. She lowered her eyes. And you'll let them? He turned toward her, his gaze sharp. You think I haven't spent my life fighting both sides? He said. To the whites, I'm a savage. To my own, I'm a ghost of a man who walked too close to the fire. I've been living in between for too long. The rain fell harder outside, the wind howling through the canyon mouth. The woman leaned back, feeling her strength fading. Maybe this is how it's meant to be, she said softly. Maybe none of us are meant to belong anywhere anymore. The Apache watched her, his face softening. Don't say that, he said. The land still remembers who we are, even if the people forget. She smiled faintly, eyes heavy. Then promise me something, she whispered. If something happens to me, don't let them take my child. Promise you'll protect him. He nodded, his voice barely audible. I will. Lightning flashed across the sky, painting the cave walls in white light. The Apache moved closer to the entrance, scanning the darkness outside. Then he saw them, faint shapes moving through the rain, torches flickering like ghosts. His hand went to his knife. The woman stirred. What is it? She asked, her voice weak. He didn't answer right away. The fire flickered behind him, throwing his shadow long against the cave wall. They've found us, he said finally. Her breath caught in her chest. Your people. He looked back at her, his face hard. No, he said quietly. The soldiers. The sound of thunder swallowed her gasp, and in the distance, the drums began again, faster this time. Echoing through the valley like the heartbeat of the earth, the Apache moved fast, dousing the small fire with his boot and pulling the woman gently to her feet. The flicker of torchlight grew brighter beyond the curtain of rain. The soldiers were close now, voices muffled but determined, their boots crunching against the wet earth. The woman's hands trembled as she clutched the Apache's arm. We can't outrun them, she whispered. He glanced toward the back of the cave, where the wall split into a narrow passage. There's another way out, he said. It leads up through the ridge. He handed her a small knife from his belt. If we're separated, keep this. Don't hesitate to use it. Her breath hitched, fear tightening her chest. I've never hurt anyone. Then pray you don't have to, he said quietly. They slipped into the narrow tunnel, their steps echoing softly against the damp stone. Behind them, voices shouted orders, the clang of rifles striking rock ringing through the cave's mouth. The Apache led the way, his hand brushing against the rough wall as if guiding himself by instinct. The passage grew tighter until they had to crawl. The woman winced with every movement, her body heavy, her breath shallow. When they finally reached the opening, dawn was bleeding into the horizon, the rain softening into mist. The Apache helped her out, scanning the valley below. From the ridge they could see the soldiers spreading through the canyon, torches flickering like stars swallowed by smoke. They know where we are, she said, her voice shaking. He nodded. They'll follow the river. It's the only path wide enough for their horses. Then where do we go? He turned toward the distant mountains, their peaks still hidden under low clouds. North, he said, is a place my people once used, a trading post by the old mines. The soldiers won't risk going that far. The woman looked down the ridge, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. And your people? She asked. What if they find us first? He didn't answer, only began walking. Silence said enough. The journey through the high country tested every ounce of their strength. The woman's steps grew slower with each mile, her breaths uneven, but she never complained. The Apache kept a steady pace beside her, always watching the horizon. At night they camped in silence, the stars stretching endless above them. When she finally fell asleep, he would sit awake, sharpening his knife, staring into the fire with thoughts he never voiced. On the third night, they came upon the ruins of an old settlement, a handful of wooden shacks and a rusted water pump half buried in dust. The Apache studied it from a distance before approaching. "Used to be a miner's camp," he said, "abandoned years ago." They settled inside one of the shacks, the woman lowering herself carefully onto a broken cot. She touched the frame of the window, her fingers tracing the worn wood. "Someone lived here," she said softly. "It feels strange to think how fast places die out here." He glanced around the room, his expression unreadable. "Nothing lasts long in these lands," he said. "It's not homes, not peace." As the night deepened, the wind rose again, whistling through the cracks in the walls. The woman stared into the fire they'd built in a tin basin. "You said your brother was taken near Fort Yuma," she said after a long pause. "Do you think he ever tried to escape?" The Apache's eyes flickered. "He was strong," he said, "stronger than me. If he didn't make it, it's because they broke him." She swallowed hard. "What you said is true, and my husband was part of that." He stopped her with a look. "You don't need to say it," he said quietly. "The truth doesn't change what's been done." But she couldn't let it rest. "If your brother is truly the father of this child," she said, her voice trembling, "then everything I've believed about my life has been a lie." The Apache leaned back against the wall, his face shadowed. "We've both been living in lies," he said. "The difference is, I already buried mine." Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. The woman looked toward the window, her expression distant. "When I first met my husband, he was kind. He talked about the future, about building a home far from the wars. I believed him because I wanted to. But the man who burned that village, I didn't recognize him anymore. It's like something inside him turned to stone." The Apache nodded slowly. "War does that. It takes good men and teaches them to live with their own cruelty." "Did it do that to you?" she asked. He met her gaze for a long moment before looking away. "Maybe," he said. "But I still remember what mercy feels like." That night, neither of them slept much. The wind carried strange sounds through the valley, whispers of voices, the creak of old wood, the far-off echo of hooves. The woman woke before dawn to find the Apache gone. Panic gripped her chest until she saw him outside, crouched beside a small stream. He was washing something, a strip of cloth stained dark with blood. She stepped closer. "You're bleeding again," she said. He shook his head. "Not mine." Her eyes widened. "Then whose?" He lifted his gaze toward the ridge. "There were tracks," he said. "3 riders, heading this way. They're close." Her heart quickened. "The soldiers?" "Maybe," he said. "But the prints are light, not cavalry. Scouts." The woman's grip tightened on her shawl. "Then we have to leave now." He nodded and began saddling the horse. As they packed what little they had, she noticed a small leather pouch tied to his belt. "What's in there?" she asked. He hesitated. "Something my brother gave me," he said. "Piece of his soul," he called it. She frowned. "What does that mean?" He looked at her then, his expression haunted. "You'll understand when you see it." They rode north again, the landscape shifting from red canyons to rocky slopes dotted with pine. The air grew colder, and snow appeared along the mountain's edge. The woman's strength began to fade, and by late afternoon she leaned heavily against the Apache. "I can't go much farther," she whispered. He guided the horse toward a sheltered ridge, where the remains of an old church stood, its roof half collapsed, its bell long gone. Inside, they found a dry corner and laid their things down. The woman sat near the altar, her hands shaking. "This place," she said softly, "it feels forgotten." The Apache set down his rifle, glancing at the faded cross still hanging from the wall. "Places like this don't forget," he said. "They just wait for someone to remember." She looked up at him, her eyes full of tired wonder. "You speak like a man who's seen the world end." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe I have." As night fell, the air filled with the scent of smoke and rain. The woman drifted into uneasy sleep, but the Apache stayed awake, sitting by the door. Outside, faint figures moved through the trees, shadows against the moonlight. He reached for his rifle, his heartbeat steady, his breath slow. Then he heard it, a voice calling his name in the old tongue. He froze, his hand trembling slightly. No one had spoken his name that way in years. He rose and stepped outside, eyes scanning the dark. A tall figure emerged from behind a tree, cloaked in fur, his face painted with ash. The Apache raised his rifle, but the man lifted his hand in peace. "It's been a long time, brother," the stranger said. The Apache's breath caught. His voice came out hoarse. "Can't be." The man stepped closer, the firelight from the church catching his face. It was older now, scarred, but unmistakable. "You thought they killed me," he said. But the soldiers wanted something worse than death. The Apache lowered his rifle, disbelief turning to relief and fear all at once. "They said you were gone," he said. "I searched for you." The man nodded. "I know. I saw you once from the ridge, but I couldn't come to you. They kept me alive because I could guide them. I led them through our land, through sacred places I swore I'd never show." His voice broke. "And then they made me take a woman." The Apache's blood ran cold. "What woman?" The man's eyes filled with shame. "One of theirs, a settler's wife. They said they'd kill me if I didn't. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know she'd be carrying my child." The Apache's chest tightened, his thoughts spinning. "She's here," he said. "She's alive. She's carrying your son." The man closed his eyes, tears cutting through the dust on his cheeks. "Then I can't stay," he said. "If the soldiers find me, they'll kill you both. They'll think we planned this together." Before the Apache could answer, a shout cut through the night. Gunfire followed. The woman screamed from inside the church. The Apache turned, but his brother grabbed his arm. "Go," he said. "No, hold them off." The Apache's heart pounded. "You won't survive." "I already didn't," his brother said with a broken smile. The sound of boots and gunfire grew closer. The Apache hesitated only a moment before running back into the church. The woman was crouched behind the altar, clutching the knife he'd given her. "They found us," she cried. He pulled her to her feet, his voice steady, but his eyes wild. "We're leaving," he said.
Oh.
Outside, the night burned with gunfire and rain. The sound of his brother's war cry echoed through the valley, fierce, desperate, unbroken. And as the Apache and the woman fled into the storm, the truth of everything they had feared was finally catching up to them. The night tore itself open with gunfire and rain. Bullets struck the old church walls, sending splinters flying across the room as the Apache pulled the woman through the back door. The horse neighed in panic, its reins slapping against the wooden post. He pushed her toward it, his voice firm but calm.
"Get on,"
he said. "Hold tight and don't look back." She hesitated, eyes wide, the storm soaking through her shawl. "What about your brother?" she shouted over the thunder, his jaw tightened. "He's already made his choice." She climbed onto the horse as another shot rang out, the sound echoing through the valley. The Apache swung himself up behind her, and with a sharp kick, they took off into the storm. The rain fell harder, the wind slicing through them as they raced across the muddy ground. Behind them, the church burned in flashes of orange, lighting up the figures of soldiers closing in. The Apache didn't look back, but he could hear the faint roar of his brother's voice fading into the thunder. The woman gripped his arm, her breathing ragged. "Where can we go?" she cried. He leaned close to her ear. "The ridge ahead," he said. "If we reach it, they can't follow." The horse stumbled but kept running, its hooves pounding against wet stone. The trail narrowed, and the sound of hooves behind them grew louder. The Apache turned and fired a single shot, the muzzle flash cutting through the darkness. A man fell from his horse, the rest scattering for cover. They reached the edge of the ridge, the land dropping sharply into a canyon below. The Apache slowed the horse and looked around, searching for a path. There was none. The woman's voice broke through the rain. "We're trapped." He scanned the cliffs, breathing hard. "There's another way," he said, spotting a narrow ledge that wound down along the rocks. He jumped off the horse, helping her down. "You'll have to trust me," he said. "I already do," she whispered. They moved quickly, the ledge barely wide enough for their feet. The woman's hand clutched the rock, her knuckles white. Far below, the river roared, swollen with the storm. Behind them, torches flickered near the top of the ridge. Voices shouted orders, and the faint metallic click of rifles echoed down. The Apache glanced back and saw one of the soldiers lifting a lantern. For a brief moment, the light caught the man's face, and his blood went cold. It was the woman's husband. He stopped, his breath sharp. The woman noticed his sudden stillness. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer at first, only stared up at the ridge. "It's him," he said quietly. "The man who led them here." Her face went pale. "Oh, shh," she said, her voice trembling. "It can't be." The soldier shouted her name, his voice echoing down the canyon. "You can't hide forever," he called. "You think that Savage will save you?" Tears stung her eyes, but the Apache grabbed her arm. "Don't listen," he said. "Keep moving." But she couldn't. The voice of her husband cut through her fear like a blade. "Come back, and I'll spare the child," he shouted. "Stay with him, and I'll burn this canyon to the ground." The Apache turned to her, his eyes fierce. "He means it," he said. "He'll kill us all to cover what he's done." She stared at him, torn between love, fear, and the faintest trace of hope that the man she once knew still lived somewhere inside that voice. "He wasn't always like this," she whispered. The Apache shook his head. "Maybe not. But the man you knew is gone." The soldiers began descending the ridge, their rifles glinting in the lightning. The Apache handed the woman the small knife again. "If they reach you," he said, "you know what to do?" She looked at the blade, her hands trembling. "You said not to hesitate. But what if I can't?" He met her gaze, his voice steady. "Then you die brave." The thunder cracked above them as they moved farther down. The path grew narrower until it split in two directions. The Apache glanced both ways, uncertain. "Which way?" she asked. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the wind, the river, the faint rhythm of the drums still echoing somewhere deep in the land. Then he pointed left. "That way leads to the old river crossing," he said. "If we can reach it, there's a chance." They took the left path, but as they turned the corner, a flash of lightning revealed 3 soldiers waiting at the base, rifles raised. The Apache pushed the woman behind a rock just as shots fired. Stone fragments cut across his arm. He returned fire, each shot echoing through the storm. The woman covered her ears, her heart pounding with every crack of the rifle. The battle was short but brutal. When it ended, 2 soldiers lay still, and one crawled away, clutching his wounded leg. The Apache reloaded, breathing hard. "We have to keep moving," he said, pulling her to her feet. As they descended, the trail curved sharply toward the riverbank. The water below churned wild, flashes of white breaking against the rocks. The woman stumbled, her foot slipping on the wet stone. The Apache caught her just in time, his arms steady around her. Their eyes met, and for a moment everything else disappeared. The gunfire, the storm, the chase. Only the 2 of them, bound by survival and something deeper that neither could name. But then another shout broke the moment. Her husband had reached the edge of the cliff above them. He stood with a rifle aimed straight at them, his coat drenched and face twisted with rage. "Step away from her," he roared. The Apache pulled her close, his gun raised but silent. "You'll hit her before you hit me," he called back. The man's eyes narrowed. "You think I won't?" The woman's voice trembled as she shouted up at him. "Please stop. You don't understand." "I understand enough," he said coldly. "You ran with him, carried his shame, and now you want me to let you go?" The Apache's jaw clenched. "She didn't choose this," he said. "She did when she left me," the man snapped. Lightning split the sky, followed by another shot, not from the ridge, but somewhere behind the husband. He jerked, dropping his rifle. Another shadow appeared near him, a man stepping out of the storm. The Apache recognized the silhouette immediately. His brother. The wounded husband turned, stunned, as the Apache's brother lowered his smoking pistol. "You should have stayed dead," the husband hissed. "I tried," the brother said, his voice steady despite the blood on his hands. "But ghosts like me don't rest easy." The Apache pulled the woman farther down the path as his brother shouted, "Go! I'll keep him here!" The woman turned, tears mixing with rain. "No, come with us." But he only shook his head. "You'll never make it if we all run." The Apache hesitated. "You can't fight them alone," he called. His brother gave a faint smile. "I was born fighting." Another shot rang out, this one closer. The Apache didn't wait, grabbed the woman's hand and led her down the last slope toward the river. The path gave way to mud, and the water surged beside them, wild and cold. "We'll have to cross," he said. The woman looked at the river, her fear clear. "We'll drown," she said. He glanced back at the ridge where flashes of gunfire still lit the darkness. "If we stay, we die anyway." He mounted the horse and pulled her up behind him. The river thundered below, its current raging. Urged the horse forward, and they plunged into the water. The current fought them, pulling hard, but he held tight to the reins, the woman's arms gripping his waist. The cold cut through them like knives. Every second felt like a battle against the river itself. Behind them, the sounds of gunfire faded. The storm swallowed everything, light, sound, and reason. All that remained was the fight to stay alive. Halfway across, the current surged, slamming into them with crushing force. The horse stumbled, nearly throwing them off. The Apache shouted, his voice lost in the roar of the river. The woman clung to him, her breath short, eyes wide with terror. The water rose to their waists, then their chests. Pulled her up, struggling to keep them both afloat. When they reached the far bank, the horse collapsed, exhausted. The Apache dragged the woman to shore, both of them gasping for air.
Ice.
Rain poured down, washing away the blood and mud. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the storm. Then the woman whispered, "Do you think your brother's still alive?" The Apache looked across the river where the ridge still glowed faintly from gunfire and flames. His voice was heavy with pain. "If he is, he'll find us. He always does." They sat there for a while, both shivering, both lost in their own thoughts. The woman's hand rested on her belly, her voice soft. "He'll never stop, will he, my husband?" The Apache shook his head. "Not until he has what he thinks belongs to him." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then we'll have to end it." The wind howled, carrying the smell of smoke and rain. The Apache rose and looked toward the mountains. "The old trading post isn't far," he said. "We'll rest there and plan what comes next." As they walked into the dark, the sound of thunder faded behind them, replaced by the low hum of the wind through the trees. But somewhere out there, past the river and the smoke, the man they'd escaped was still alive. He was coming for them. The woman felt it too, that invisible pull of fate tightening around them both. Every step forward brought them closer to something inevitable. The Apache's brother, her husband, the unborn child. All of it leading toward a storm far greater than the one they had just survived. And as the first pale light of dawn broke through the clouds, neither of them spoke. Because they both knew what waited ahead would decide everything. The rain had stopped by the time the Apache and the woman reached the old trading post. The morning light stretched weakly across the valley, brushing against the damp earth and broken fences. The place looked abandoned, but the faint curl of smoke from a chimney told them someone had been there recently. The Apache motioned for her to stay back as he approached the door, gun ready. When he pushed it open, a soft creak echoed through the quiet air. Inside, the room smelled of ashes and damp wood. A single lantern burned low on the counter. The Apache scanned the corners, his muscles still tense from the night's chase. Then he saw a shadow move near the hearth, slow, tired, but familiar. He froze. His brother sat against the wall, wrapped in a torn blanket, his face pale and streaked with blood. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them carried more weight than words could hold. Finally, the brother gave a faint grin. "You always did take the long way," he said, his voice weak but steady. The Apache crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt beside him. "You shouldn't have stayed back," he said quietly. "I had to," his brother replied. "He would have killed her, or worse." He coughed, the sound rough in his chest. "Is she safe?" The woman stepped into the doorway, her shawl clinging to her shoulders. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "You saved us," she whispered. The brother tried to smile, but pain flickered across his face. Then it was worth it. The Apache helped him lie down near the fire and wrapped him in an extra blanket. Checked the wound. A bullet had grazed his side. Deep but not fatal if treated soon. The woman found a basin and began to heat water, her hands trembling as she worked. The silence between the 3 of them was heavy but peaceful, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. As the day passed, the storm clouds drifted away, leaving behind a sky streaked with gold and gray. The woman sat beside the fire, staring into the flames. Her thoughts were far away, tangled in memories of what she had lost and what still lay ahead. "He won't stop," she said finally. "He'll keep hunting us." The Apache looked at her, then at his brother, who lay resting. "Won't have to," the Apache said. "'Cause when he finds us, it'll end." The woman's eyes met his, filled with fear and something deeper, trust. "Then we finish it together," she said. By dusk, the brother was strong enough to stand with help. They shared a quiet meal of dried beans and bread left behind by whoever once traded there. The air was cool, the kind of calm that comes after a storm, but beneath it all was still that unease, the feeling that someone was watching, waiting. When night fell, they took turns keeping watch. The Apache sat by the door, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. The woman slept near the fire, one hand resting protectively over her belly. The brother dozed in short, restless bursts, haunted by memories of what they had survived. Hours passed, the wind whispering through the cracks of the old building. Then, somewhere beyond the trees, a horse neighed. The Apache stood slowly, listening. Another sound followed, the crunch of boots on gravel. He knew that sound. He shook his brother awake. "He's here." The brother nodded, grim but ready. The woman stirred, fear flashing in her eyes. "We can run," she said, her voice low. The Apache shook his head. "There's nowhere left to run." The door swung open before he could say more. The woman's husband stood in the doorway, soaked in sweat and dust, his rifle aimed straight at them. His eyes were wild, half mad from the chase. "I told you," he said coldly. "You can't hide." The Apache raised his gun, but his brother stepped forward, his hand lifting weakly. "Let me handle this," he said. The husband's eyes darted to him, then to the woman. "You think she belongs with you?" he shouted. "You took everything from me." The brother's voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "You did that yourself." The man's finger tightened on the trigger. The Apache moved fast, firing once. The husband fired at the same moment. The shots echoed together, shaking the wooden walls. When the smoke cleared, both men stood still for a breathless second. Then the husband staggered back, clutching his shoulder. He dropped his rifle and fell to his knees, breathing hard. "You think this ends here?" he hissed. "You'll never be free." The Apache lowered his weapon and stepped closer. "We already are." The man looked up at his wife then, his face full of something that was not quite hatred, not quite regret, just exhaustion. "You'd choose him over me?" he asked. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm not choosing him," she said softly. "I'm choosing peace." He stared at her for a long moment before his strength gave out and he slumped to the floor, unconscious. The Apache's brother swayed on his feet, clutching his side again. The Apache caught him, easing him down. "It's over," he said. His brother gave a faint smile. "For you, maybe." His voice trembled. "Take her to the valley. There's a small settlement near the river. She'll be safe there." "You're coming with us," the Apache said. But his brother shook his head. "No, my fight was never meant to last this long." He looked up at the woman and smiled weakly. "Take care of him. Stubborn, but his heart's good." The woman knelt beside him, tears falling freely now. "Don't go," she whispered. He didn't answer. His eyes closed slowly, his breathing fading into the quiet night. The Apache sat beside him for a long time after that, not speaking, not moving. The fire burned low, and outside the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The woman placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and for once he didn't pull away. They buried his brother beneath the oak tree behind the trading post, the soil still damp from the rain. The Apache placed a small carved stone at the head of the grave, a symbol of passage and honor among his people. The woman stood beside him, her hands folded over her belly, the wind carrying her quiet prayer into the morning air. When they finally left, the sky had cleared completely. The valley stretched wide before them, green and gold beneath the sun. The Apache rode beside her, both of them silent but no longer afraid. Days passed, and they reached the settlement his brother had spoken of, a small cluster of cabins near the river, where the land was rich and the air felt still. The people there welcomed them without question, offering food and a place to rest. The Apache built a small shelter at the edge of the village, where the hills met the trees. It was simple, but it was enough. As time passed, peace returned slowly, like sunlight after a long storm. The woman's child was born under a red dawn, healthy and strong. The Apache held the baby carefully, the small bundle wrapped in a worn blanket. The woman smiled at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "He'll grow up knowing kindness," she said. The Apache nodded, his voice quiet. In truth, the seasons changed, and though the memories of the past still lingered, they no longer ruled over them. The woman often visited the grave beneath the oak, leaving small flowers and bits of ribbon. The Apache would stand beside her, silent but present, guarding the peace they had fought so hard to find. Sometimes, at night, he would sit outside their cabin and look toward the distant mountains, where the wind still whispered through the canyons. He would think of his brother, of the battles fought and the ones never won. But in the quiet rustle of the trees and the soft laughter from inside the cabin, he found something that felt close to redemption. Years later, people in the nearby settlements would still tell stories about the night the Apache rode through the storm to save a woman who had no one left to trust. Some said it was a legend, others swore it was true. But for the Apache and the woman, it didn't matter what people believed. What mattered was the life they built, the promise they kept, and the quiet understanding that even in a world filled with pain, there could still be mercy. The wind carried that truth across the valley each evening, through the tall grass and over the river, a reminder that some stories end not with vengeance or sorrow, but with the slow healing of the human heart.